The issue of agricultural stubble burning in the northern states of Punjab and Haryana and a toxic haze hanging over the Delhi NCR region have again grabbed headlines. For this episode, I set out to understand the economic cost of these developments, but along the way, I learned a lot more. So stay with me and we'll touch upon a little bit of the dynamics of agriculture, climate change, the roles that seasons play, groundwater policies, and of course, some economics too. Hello and welcome back to Business Matters at the Hindu with me, K. Bharat Kumar. It's interesting that crop residue burning in the states of Punjab and Haryana and surrounding regions and a toxic haze that hangs annually every year around this time of year over the Delhi NCR region, these issues have only come to the fore in the recent past, only in the last few years. How come we hadn't heard of these developments, say, 20 years ago or 30 years ago? The answer to that question comes in several parts. You may know that the Green Revolution, which ensured food security for India, ushered in high-yielding crops, particularly for wheat and rice, starting in the 1960s. The states of Punjab and Haryana took the best advantage of these agricultural innovations. A 2021 note by the Center for Chronic Disease Control observes that Punjab, though comprising only 1.5% of the country's total geographic area, contributes 13 to 14% towards the country's total food grain output. It also points out that the state contributes about 25.5% of rice and 35.5% of wheat to the central pool. The document, titled Stubble Burning in Punjab, also quotes a 2014 study to show that crop production growth has been achieved by technology in the northern regions, and northern regions see a high concentration or dependence on rice and wheat crops, compared with the southern and western regions which have seen crop diversification as a growth strategy, which means that they have a mixture of both cereals and non-cereal crops. The two charts on your screens show how Punjab and the surrounding regions have come to prefer cereals, while the rest of the country has moved in the opposite direction. The chart on your left shows an increase in area under cereal crops production in Punjab, and please note this is in 1,000 hectares. And the one on the right shows a decrease in area under other crops in Punjab. Now, after the rice harvest that takes place in October, the farmers in these regions have anywhere in the region of only 10 to 20 days to prepare their fields again for the wheat harvest in the upcoming season. Why is there such a short gap? Kiran Kumar Vissa, co-founder of Raitu Swarajya Vedika, a farmers' organization in Telangana and AP, says that in times gone by, sowing for the paddy crop used to take place earlier in the year. Alarmed by the sharply declining groundwater table, which had been going down for the previous few decades, Punjab passed a law in 2009 that mandated the sowing for paddy only in late June so that farmers could make the best of the monsoons instead of depending solely on the groundwater. You may note now that rice requires a lot more water than an alternative crop such as maize. This well-intentioned law now has a consequence. Farmers now have a short window of time within which they have to prepare the field after the rice harvest and before they can start sowing for wheat. Farmers complain that they have no alternative but to burn the crop residue because the time is so short and they have no other option. The CCDC document says that in Punjab, annually 20 million tons of crop residue is left behind after the rice harvest, of which 80% is burnt in these farms. According to the document, a survey in Punjab showed that 41% of farmers attributed crop stubble burning to a short window of time available between harvesting paddy and sowing for wheat, while 48% said that burning is more economical and faster. Crop residue refers both to the stubble as well as the hay or the straw that the paddy harvest leaves behind. The now ubiquitous combine harvester that helps harvest the paddy leaves taller stubble on the ground, which makes sowing for wheat more difficult. Manual removal of stubble would cause delays that are inadmissible because wheat has to be sowed in a certain period of time frame. Farmers don't have a lot of time to wait for this. Cost estimates are rupees 3,500 and upwards per hectare, and that's too costly for the average farmer. Because of the alleged link between crop burning in these northern states and the toxic haze that hangs over Delhi NCR region, there is a lot of finger pointing going on towards the farmers. In an exhaustive article that appeared last week in The Hindu by my colleagues Vikas Vasudeva and Nikhil M. Babu, we see farmers pointing out that they did not have cost-effective alternatives to burning. They say that they themselves were the first victims of atmospheric pollution and resultant respiratory diseases. So if they had an alternative, why would they go ahead and burn crop residue? They also point out that if a minimum support price were available for non-cereal crops such as maize, they would happily switch. Mr. Vissa of Raitu Swarajya Vedika, whom we quoted earlier in this episode, says that the government needs to come up with a solution that offers an alternative to farmers but also is practical. He says farmers appreciate incentives, but if there is no way a farmer can get rid of this crop residue, then incentives alone won't help. For example, in recent years, the state government has made available crop residue management machines that help remove the stubble from the ground. But availability of these machines in time has been an issue. Because if the farmer has a window of 10 to 20 days only to prepare the field for the next crop, then if the machines are not available in that time to remove the stubble, then that won't help at all. Why don't we hear of such problems in other parts of the country? Mr. Vissa points out that problems exist everywhere, but the magnitude is high in the northern states. He points out that Punjab, Haryana and the surrounding regions have opted for the paddy-wheat cycle, which means between June and October is the paddy cycle, and then for the next season, wheat comes in. But in the southern regions, it's a paddy-paddy cycle. So the farmers finish harvesting the rice in October and then go on to sowing for paddy in the next season as well. So that gives them a lot more flexibility. He points out that they have more time on their hands because unlike with wheat, which is sensitive to temperatures, they don't have a strict time window. Further, they can allow the residue, such as hay, to stay on the soil. It disintegrates over, say, the period before which paddy is transplanted and can actually add to the fertility of the soil. For context, you may already know that the rice crop requires transplantation of seedlings that are about a month old from the nursery. They are literally soaked in or remain under water for a month after sowing. So that gives the hay more time to disintegrate if paddy crop is to follow paddy crop. Anantu of the Safe Food Alliance agrees that the short time window between paddy and wheat is one problem. He says wheat is climate sensitive, so the farmer cannot push sowing for wheat beyond a point. But he says there are other issues that add to the problem. One such, he says, is the change in the direction of the wind as the southwest monsoon withdraws. Pushing the rice harvest to October also means that the changeover to wheat happens at the time when the direction of the wind changes. This typically happens in the second to third week of October, says Professor Sachidanand Tripathi, professor with joint appointment at the Civil Engineering Department and Sustainable Energy Engineering at IIT Kanpur. Professor Krishna Osuri, associate professor in the Department of Earth and Atmospheric Sciences at NIT Rourkela, also says there are other factors at play in how the winds behave. He points to the effect of the subtropical jet stream from the Mediterranean Sea. When it approaches the Himalayas, one branch, he says, is pushed southward in the winter months, supplementing the northwesterly winds in the northwest parts of India. This could likely aggravate the effect of wind on how the toxic haze behaves over Delhi. That brings us to the next important question to this debate. Could climate change be aggravating this problem? No one can say for sure. You need studies that look at different patterns across 20-30 years. But what is certain, says Professor Tripathi, is that milder temperatures cause pollutants to hang lower than they otherwise would have. The temperature lapse rate, or the pace at which temperature drops, influences what is called the boundary layer, that is the layer below which the pollutants remain. A sharp drop in temperature helps promote upward movement of the pollutants. We finally arrive at the answer to the question, what is the economic impact of these developments? A paper published this year by Professor Tripathi of IIT Kanpur and others in the Environmental Science and Technology Letters says that the convergence of events at this time of year severely impacts the public health of the NCR. Given the pervasive human respiratory distress, it sees about 16,000 annual untimely deaths and an estimated reduction of life expectancy by 6 years at a potential annual economic cost of $30 billion. It also pointed out that India records about 1.8 million deaths annually from air pollution related health issues. Now that takes us to this week's quiz question. How much water is needed to produce 1 kilo of rice? How does this compare with non-cereal crops such as maize, for example? Here is the answer to last week's question, which was, what is the phenomenon that has the opposite effect to El Niño on warm and cold waters? The answer is La Niña. This has the opposite effect to El Nino. It pushes warm water away from the American coasts. That impacts weather in the US and across the world. It's interesting how nature requires a balance to be maintained across the world for optimal rainfall for all our crops thousands of kilometers away in India. That's all we have for you this week, but unlike in earlier weeks, we have two questions for you instead of one. Have you or has anybody that you know been exposed to a respiratory infection because of crop residue burning? And two, have you come across an agricultural process which has helped get rid of crop residue in a fashion that is environmentally friendly? Till we meet again, have a lovely time ahead.